Welcome to Unintended Consequences, episode 44 for June 30th, 2026. Today's profile, a policy that did the opposite of what its designers intended. On a Tuesday morning in February 2003, drivers approaching the newly marked boundary of central London encountered a £5 daily charge they had never paid before. Picture the scene at one of the entry points along the inner ring road. A motorist who had previously driven straight through what would become the priced zone now had to decide whether to pay the flat fee or find another route entirely. The painted red lines and camera gantries made the boundary unmistakable, yet nothing in the physical layout of the surrounding streets had changed to absorb the vehicles that might choose to avoid crossing it. Inside the zone, traffic volumes fell noticeably within weeks. Transport for London's early counts showed roughly 15% fewer vehicles entering during charging hours, which translated, if you start with a baseline of 100 vehicles on a typical morning, to only about 85 vehicles making the same trip. That reduction eased conditions for buses and remaining cars within the 8 square mile area. Yet the same arithmetic implied that 15 vehicles per 100 had to go somewhere else or not travel at all. Outside the painted red lines, however, residents in Hackney, Tower Hamlets, and parts of Islington began recording longer queues on their local high streets and higher readings on air quality monitors that had previously shown steadier numbers. These were not the main radial routes that planners had modeled most carefully. They were the residential connectors and shopping streets that sat just beyond the cordon. Monitors that had once registered gradual improvements now captured incremental rises in nitrogen dioxide at certain boundary sites, a shift that appeared smaller or even reversed compared with the clearer drops recorded inside the zone itself. Ken Livingstone, elected mayor of London in 2000, had inherited a city whose central streets were among the most congested in Europe. Average speeds during peak hours had fallen below 10 miles per hour, which meant that a journey that should have taken 15 minutes could stretch to 25 or 30. And bus reliability suffered as a direct result because the same slow-moving traffic delayed every service that crossed the core. Livingstone and his transport advisors drew on earlier studies, including work by the London Planning Advisory Committee in the 1990s. That treated pricing as a practical way to manage scarce road space rather than simply adding more lanes. Those studies had shown that even modest charges could shift some trips to other times or modes, and the policy aligned with the new Greater London Authority's powers under the 1999 Act, which explicitly allowed road user charging as one of the tools available to the mayor. At the time, the dominant concern was the visible gridlock inside the historic core. The outer boroughs were viewed mainly as corridors feeding that core, rather than as places that might absorb displaced flows. One obvious objection is whether planners simply overlooked the boundary roads. The record shows that some outer borough councillors did raise displacement concerns during the 2001 to 2002 consultation. Yet the prevailing view was that any spillover effects could be studied after the scheme began and adjusted if necessary. The charge took effect on February 17, 2003, across an 8 square mile zone bounded by the Inner Ring Road. Cameras recorded number plates at entry points, and drivers could pay by midnight the same day, removing the need for physical barriers while still creating a sharp financial line. Within the first month, Transport for London reported a 15% drop in vehicles entering the zone during charging hours, and a 30% reduction in congestion measured by journey time delays. If 100 vehicles had previously crossed a cordon point, the new figure was roughly 85. The time saved on each remaining trip compounded across thousands of daily movements. Livingstone described the scheme as a spectacular success in his 2004 progress report because those central numbers improved so quickly. Early monitoring focused on central counts and bus speeds. Boundary road data were collected but received less immediate public attention because the primary goal had been to demonstrate relief inside the zone. Traffic that previously crossed the zone now stopped short or diverted around it. Counts on the Marylebone Road and other inner ring road sections rose by roughly 4 to 10% in the first year, according to Transport for London's own boundary monitoring. If a road had carried 1,000 vehicles on an average day before the charge, the new total could reach 1,040 to 1,100, enough to lengthen queues at signals and increase idling. In residential streets just north and east of the zone, local authorities recorded increases in through traffic that had not been modeled in detail beforehand. Delivery vans and smaller commercial vehicles facing the flat daily fee sometimes consolidated fewer trips or altered routes in ways that concentrated activity on perimeter roads rather than spreading it evenly. Residents in Hackney and Islington reported longer waits at local junctions and, in some cases, rerouted school runs that added minutes to already tight schedules. The causal chain was straightforward once the numbers are examined step by step. A cordon price creates a sharp discontinuity at its edge. Inside the line, the cost is £5, outside, it is zero. Drivers rationally seek the lowest cost path that avoids the priced area, which means any trip whose origin and destination can be connected without crossing the cordon will shift to the unpriced boundary roads. Because the scheme did not price or restrict the boundary roads themselves, those roads became the new equilibrium points for marginal trips that could no longer use the interior as a shortcut. An obvious objection is that many drivers might simply cancel trips or switch to transit. While some did, the monitoring data showed that enough marginal traffic remained on the perimeter to produce measurable increases. Second-order effects included pressure on parking in adjacent neighborhoods and complaints from bus operators whose cross-boundary services encountered new delays. Third-order effects appeared in local planning debates as several boroughs began considering their own mini-charging proposals to protect residential streets from the diverted flows. Transport for London expanded the zone westward in 2007, then reversed that expansion in 2011 after a change in mayoral administration. The daily charge rose in steps, reaching £15 by 2020, and an ultra-low emission zone overlay was added in 2019 that extended beyond the original boundary. Continuous monitoring eventually produced annual reports that tracked both central improvements and boundary conditions, leading to targeted junction upgrades and bus lane extensions on some perimeter routes. No wholesale reversal occurred. The core scheme remained in place and was later cited in the design of clean air zones in other British cities. The lasting adjustment has been a broader recognition that cordon systems require explicit attention to the ring of streets immediately outside the priced area. Any boundary drawn for pricing or regulation will shift activity to the spaces just beyond it unless those spaces are also managed. Systems that treat the edge as neutral ground reliably discover that the edge is where the next bottleneck forms. When designing interventions that rely on sharp geographic distinctions, planners can usefully ask what new flows will be created at the perimeter and whether those flows can be priced, calmed, or absorbed without simply relocating the original problem. How might today's proposals for low-traffic neighborhoods or workplace parking levies account for the same boundary dynamics? That's Unintended Consequences for today. If this episode gave you something to think about, share it with a friend who'd appreciate the story. Subscribe wherever you listen, and we'll be back tomorrow with another case. And if you'd rather watch than listen, find us on YouTube at Nerra Network. Links in the show notes. And before you go, this show is part of the Nerra Network, a family of daily podcasts on tech, science, and markets, each one a short, sharp briefing you can finish on the commute. If today earned its place in your feed, here's your next listen. Models and Agents, your daily briefing on AI models and agents. Find every show free at nerranetwork.com. This episode used AI voice synthesis of my voice. Editorial selection and analysis are my own.